Welcome, everybody, to our episode of Learning English Through the News. We have with us today Onur, my co host, and Yasin Akan is joining us today as well. Today is a special episode. Everyone is excited about what's going on in Washington, D.C. We have the inauguration of the U.S. president, and we're not inaugurating Trump, we're inaugurating Joe Biden, America's greatest grandpa president. So we're gonna go
Oubai
straight
huh?
we're going to get straight into it. And people, and while Onur is opening up his screen to show us the article that we're going to be translating, the way this show works, the format is basically we open up a news article from a current event that's going on today, being the inauguration, and we look at an article that's being read in that's being written in Turkish, and we translate that into English. And this is supposed to give our viewers, Onur especially because he is trying to improve his English,
Yeah.
this is going to give him some skills that he can use, practical skills that he can use while he's trying to translate some of this information from Turkish to English. And the main goal here is to try and think like both a native Turkish speaker as well as an English speaker, because what makes sense in Turkish may not necessarily make sense in the same structure in English. And the goal is to be able to translate, get the information moved from Turkish to English so that anybody could understand it, especially a native English speaker. Onur has found an article for us. This is from the BBC.
I mean, let
Um,
me explain what you said in Turkish as well, because we may have some subscribers who just started to speak English.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Arkadaşlar şu anda yapmış olduğumuz haberleri İngilizceye çevirerek İngilizcemizi bir nebze olsun geliştirmek. Buradaki esas faktör Ubeyde'ye ben sorduğumda abi bu konuda bana yardımcı olabilir misin şeklinde. O da kesinlikle memnuniyet duyarım dedi. İlk başlarda yaptığımız çalışmalarda çok verim aldım. Ben şahsım adına söyleyeyim. Ciddi anlamda faydalı oldu benim için. Bu yaptığımız çalışmalardan sizlerin de faydalanmasını istedik. Ben native, hani Türkçe konuşan bir insanım. Ubey de Amerikalı. Yasin dostum da sağ olsun bu projede bize destek olmak istedi. Kendisi hem Türk hem İngilizce, hani native speaker, kendisi Kanada'da oldu.
Kanadalı. Kanadalı.
Aynen, yarı gavur yani anlayacağınız.
Oh, fuck yourself. You can bleep that part out, yeah?
Ya burada yaptığımız, ben Türk mantığıyla çeviri yapmaya çalışıyorum. Burada Ubeyde ve Yasin bana bir ana dili İngilizce olanın cümle yapısına nasıl baktığı, ne şekilde şekillendirmemiz gerektiği cümleleri konusunda yardımcı olacaklar. Vaktimizi fazla boşa harcamadan başlayalım isterseniz. Are we ready, guys?
I suggest we only do the headline here. We're going to have a special guest joining us today. Oubai Shahbandar. He is a well-known political analyst, defense analyst. He's worked in a number of different channels around the world and a number of different positions, and is very well informed about politics in America and in Washington, D.C. So he's going to be joining us. So we're going to run through this headline very quickly, and then he's going to join us in about 4 to 5 minutes. So why don't you put that into a word?
Yeah, just headline you mean?
Yeah, let's just do the headline.
Biden'ın yemin töreni. Yemin töreni inauguration ceremony'ydi değil mi abi?
Yeah, the Yamin töreni is inauguration ceremony. Exactly. Like, there's no other way to say it. There's no other option.
Inauguration ceremony. Beyaz Saray'da görev değişimi nasıl oluyor? Yeni başkana ne tür hazırlıklar yapılıyor? Beyaz Saray'da görev değişimi. Görev değişimi abi çok hakim değilim. Görev değişimi The change of the term.
Yeah. So there's a brev is like a job
Transfer of
that
power.
it yeah, transfer of power, exactly.
Transfer. How the transfer
How does the transfer of power happen at the White House?
power happen in the
In the White House.
in the White House.
Okay, so you said it. What are the preparations that are made for the new president?
What are the preparations that are made for?
We can make it less wordy right now. I will explain. So the way we've written it is like very passive tense, right? So in order to change that passive tense and make it much clearer, we're just going to say what preparations are made for the new president.
Yeah,
What
basically, that's acceptable.
What preparations
are made for the new president.
Yeah.
The last version was the passive voice, kind of like it's written in Turkish, right? But when you say that in English, it's very wordy and it's passive voice, so it comes off really bad, and you definitely wouldn't write it in a headline in passive voice like that. In English, you would write it like you've just said. Could you read what we or show it to us if you can?
Yeah, Biden's inauguration ceremony, how the transfer power happened in the White House, what preparations are made for the new president. Oh.
So Oubai Shahbandar has joined us now from Istanbul. Yasin is also in Istanbul. I'm here in Istanbul. Onur is in Ankara. And we're talking about the inauguration that's happening tomorrow. There's a lot to talk about here. We were just taking a look at this BBC Turkish article. The headline is reading something like, tomorrow is the inauguration ceremony for Biden. There's going to be a transfer of power or a change of power in the White House. What kind of preparations are made for the new president? So, Oubai, what is it that you think is going to be the most important thing that people walk away from after the inauguration?
Well, it's funny because it's going to be relatively anticlimactic, and it's weird to say that because we have 20,000 U.S. troops from the National Guard and an unprecedented situation being deployed at the heart of the Capitol. Washington, D.C. is closed. There will be no live crowds because of the security situation and because of the COVID situation. So this is the first time that we've had an inauguration like this. And what adds to the unprecedented nature of the inauguration is that the outgoing president is not going to be there. Usually, as part of the peaceful handover ceremony, the outgoing president sits with the incoming president, and it can be awkward. I remember the inauguration for Obama in 2008, where George Bush was there along with the First Lady, and people started, booing very loudly when President Bush's name was announced during the inauguration. So, but these things can happen, and there are some security concerns. I personally think they're a bit probably overblown. I don't know if it was really necessary to have 20,000.
I want to ask you about this because I've been watching, like my dad watches the news a lot, like most dads, I guess. So it's not anything that's too peculiar. But he's been watching. We've been watching a lot of CNN. When we're watching the news, we're watching CNN, and it's really interesting because what's happened since January 6th is that there's been this discussion about what was the security failure in Washington, D.C. Why did they let it happen? And then it turned out to be that the FBI was actually investigating people in the National Guard. So can you give us an idea about how real is this threat? Is there an actual threat, or is this kind of like something that we see all the time in the news media where perspectives are being managed, and
Well,
opinions are being kind of like given more weight than others. So kind of give us some perspective on that.
that's a very good question because the media has a very short attention span, particularly the mainstream media. Forget in 2007 there was a significant amount of violence. Sorry, in 2017 there was a significant amount of violence in that inauguration for President Trump. But it was far left extremists. Antifa was out in the streets. They were burning cars. They were attacking people as they were going to the inauguration ceremony. It was pandemonium. But we don't really see much institutional memory from the mainstream American media when that happened. Washington D.C. from May to August of 2020 was a war zone. People's homes were being threatened. The significant part of downtown D.C. Was burned down by protesters. Now, regardless of what you think, what the reasoning behind that, any type of violence is wrong. But again, the institutional memory of the mainstream media is extremely short. Now, when it comes to the National Guard, look, the National Guard is a reserve unit. Is the National Guard. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of people who are involved in the National Guard. It's essentially, a couple of weekends a month of drilling. It's citizen soldiers. So are you going to have a bad apple here and there? Of course. We've seen extremists, both of the far left and in the far right, joining the U.S. military to use those skills that when they leave, that they can then use to advance their agenda. We've seen a lot of for example, ex-U.S. soldiers joining the extremist YPG, PKK in Syria, and then coming back to the U.S. and then trying to use those skills to train other extremists. But does that mean that we can expect some sort of attack tomorrow? I personally think that the mainstream media in the U.S., this is a big narrative for ratings. This is what they want. They want people to be in a constant state of fear, of anticipation that something big is going to happen, that disastrous. That's what gets ratings for these cable news networks, right?
Will they be able to gather on the streets?
And call me a cynic, but sorry, let me say that again.
Will they be able to gather on the streets tomorrow?
There won't be any public gatherings, right?
No, it is shut. DC map. So the government released a map of the road closures in DC. It is closed. And now, for the viewers out there, you got to understand the inauguration is like the people's ceremony. People can line up to watch the parade. There, you can, even if you don't have VIP tickets, people can still go and see the speech of the incoming president. It's a historic ceremony to mark the peaceful handover of power from one president to another, or the re-election of the president. But it's supposed to be very accessible to the general public. And then for the next few days, there will be events, parties, balls. It's a very festive atmosphere. Typically, this year, it is anything but that, both for security concerns, which I believe are a bit overblown, frankly, and of course, because of the COVID corona situation.
What do you expect Trump to do, I guess, post-inauguration, assuming he doesn't actually show up? People are saying that he's not going to leave the White House, or he's been saying that, or people around him have been saying that he's going to refuse to leave the White House. I read some news actually in the last couple of days saying that Trump was actually just going to get out of DC before the inauguration started, and he doesn't even want to have anything to do with it. And do you think that this is going to like set a bad precedent for the office of the president of the United States? Like, could we see future presidents be like, screw this, I don't want to attend the inauguration either?
Well, look, so here's what we know for the president's schedule tomorrow. We know that today was the last full working day for President Trump. What we are expecting tomorrow is for President Trump to leave via Marine One, via helicopter in the morning, early in the morning before the inauguration, and go to his residence in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Much warmer weather, much more Trump-friendlier environment. Mar-a-Lago is a club, by the way. You can join it. You can join Mar-a-Lago and meet President Trump. It's on the ocean. I'm not paid enough to join it, but one can only dream. So this is what we're expecting from President Trump tomorrow. It doesn't seem that there's going to be any sort of dramatic last-minute change. Now, there are conspiracies out there by some of the president's supporters and by some of his opponents that say that Trump has one last card up his sleeve, but all indicators really point towards the president leaving tomorrow morning via helicopter to retirement. Now, does this mean that this is the end of President Trump's political career? We have to look at a couple of things. One, the impeachment. We are still expecting the Senate to take up the articles of impeachment post the inauguration. Now, that has never happened before, ever in the history of the United States. If the Senate convicts, it means that President Trump can never run again for the presidency. So that's going to be, there's somewhat of a second chapter to all of this drama that will play out in the Senate, and we have to keep a close eye on that because President Trump has hinted that he may plan to run for re-election in 2024. So we could be having this same discussion 4 years from now, imagine.
Right. So if President Trump does run for office again, and assuming that this second impeachment trial doesn't bear any fruits, will we see a shift in U.S. politics? Will we see a more active opposition during Biden's term?
Well, that's frankly the million-dollar question. What is going to happen to the Republican Party during the Biden presidency? Well, the Democrats have the House of Representatives. They have the Senate. They have the presidency. That very rarely happens.
For 2 years. The next
Yes.
Senate.
Yes.
For 2 years.
So that very rarely happens. Now, that doesn't mean that has happened before in American history. It hasn't, it doesn't mean that they'll be able to pass everything that, they want. Because remember, there are internal fractures, different competing factions within the Democratic Party. And typically during the midterm elections, 2 years from now, exactly as you said, the electorate likes to put the party that's not in the presidency in the majority in the Congress. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Now, from my assessment, President Trump is still going to be a massive force in the conservative movement and in the Republican Party. Look, he got over 70 million votes. He commands, even though he's no longer on Twitter, he still has a lot of followers amongst conservatives in the Republican Party. He will still be a major factor in American politics, even after he leaves the White House tomorrow morning.
How is that going to affect Biden? Biden is an old man, first of all. He's coming in after 4 years of Trumpism, if you will. Like Trump had, his own kind of way of going about politics, even on the international level, with his relations with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Israel.
Can we
get your food and you can come back?
Pause right there, and then restate that question so that okay. Can I make an endorsement for this so that maybe they can give me free chicken wings?
So, what does all of this mean for the Biden presidency? He's an old man. He's going to have a tough schedule. He's got these domestic issues to deal with, and that's going to cloud his, efforts domestically, at least, to kind of unite the country because it's clearly divided at this point. And then there's the kind of the international factor. Is he going to be healthy enough, strong enough to travel, to maintain the kind of international relations that Trump had developed or changed, at least for the United States, in terms of Russia and Arab countries like specifically Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel, and the progress that they've made in their perspective in the Middle East to kind of establishing this new kind of state of affairs where Israel is the dominant power, or becoming more dominant and normalizing relations with more Arab countries that haven't had normal relations with Israel for almost 60, 70 years. Is Biden going to be able to keep up with the pace that Trump set during his presidency?
There are serious question marks on Biden's ability to be able to withstand the pressures that go with being president. Now, he was vice president. That was relatively a long time ago. And frankly, we don't know because we haven't seen Biden on the campaign trail because of Corona. Biden has been in his basement doing virtual briefings, virtual communications. We just don't know. And that, frankly, is a scary thing for many people. We just don't know if Biden, in his age, will have the mental capacity as well as the physical stamina to be able to fully carry out the duties of the president. And that is unprecedented because we've never had a campaign like this before for presidential elections because of the nature of the pandemic. You know, the last time the U.S. had a major pandemic like this was in right after World War I. So that is a very big question mark. We'll have to wait and see. Now, Kamala Harris could very well be the president and take over for Biden. And that's going to lead a number of question marks. We just don't know what Kamala Harris's foreign policy or domestic policy will be. We just have, most people were voting against Trump, not necessarily for a Biden specific policy. So we have to keep that in mind. Look, traditionally, it seems that from the list that has been released by the Biden campaign of who we will appoint to his cabinet and to his National Security Council, they are almost all entirely former senior officials in the Obama administration. So Biden, who did have a foreign policy portfolio while he was the vice president for Obama, he specifically on Iraq, and of course, Obama dispatched Biden for senior level meetings in Ankara with President Erdogan in 2016. Well, those negotiations failed spectacularly. Those discussions were over Syria. But it seems that the old guard, the Obama old guard, is back in power in the State Department, in the Defense Department, and in the National Security Council. So we have to look at, frankly, what Obama's foreign policy trajectory was. I think we can expect a continuation of that. Physically, can Biden handle it? Look, the mainstream media back home is going to give him a honeymoon period of at least 100 days. And before they start really asking any hard questions, if they ask any hard questions at all, frankly, this is a media environment that was much more hostile to one candidate over the other one. But we are where we are right now. I think also that, frankly, the Biden administration will carry on a significant amount of the foreign policy decisions made by the Trump administration. Believe it or not, despite the supposed ideological difference, I think we can expect a certain level of continuity, perhaps obviously a shift in the rhetoric, but when it comes to tangible execution of policy, there will be a lot of crossover between the Biden administration foreign policy and the Trump administration foreign policy. A big thing to look at, the Trump administration, as their leading senior officials, are priding themselves in not having gotten the U.S. involved in a new war. Will Biden continue the trajectory of drawing down American forces from Afghanistan and moving forward with the peace deal with the Taliban that was essentially put into overdrive by the Trump administration, although not completed? And what will Biden do with U.S. troops in Syria and the small amount of U.S. troops in Iraq? I think we can, it could very well be that Biden doubles down and actually starts deploying more troops into the region, or perhaps we can easily see the U.S. being drawn into a new war, given who some of the senior officials in the National Security Council will be brought in by Biden. So we could be having this discussion 4 years from now, looking back at the Trump foreign policy, wishing that that policy was back in play in the White House. But we'll have to wait and see. And the last thing I'll say about that is that people equals policy. You have to look at the people that will comprise the policy-making infrastructure of the Biden administration. That will give you a good idea of where Biden's thinking and worldview will take America for the next 4 years.
Oubai, you have a really good habit of answering questions before any one of us really get a chance to answer them. So kudos, definitely kudos right there. I was going to ask you a question about the shift in the US foreign policy. But I guess you have a way of also setting up different questions. So over the last 4 years, what we witnessed was, living in Turkey for those 4 years, living in and around this area, working with yourself, with Ubaida, with Onur, in and around Syria, these places that are affected by the US foreign policy, we've seen a favorable outcome with respect to how the people have accepted and received this shift in policy. I guess the question here is now, what would be in the US's best interests? You did mention something about whether or not the new Biden administration will have a direct focus on foreign policy, or will we see, like you said, a continuation of that foreign policy and a very, very domestic policy centric focus moving forward? What do you think is realistic?
Look, I certainly think that this Biden administration will focus heavily on foreign policy. And part of that is just the nature of the US being a superpower, if not a hyperpower. It is the largest, most powerful military in the world. The US has 11 carrier strike groups, military bases in every corner of the world. It is foreign policy just is part and parcel of any American administration that is coming to power. You just can't ignore it. I think the question that we have to really ask ourselves, and the American public has to ask themselves, is will the U.S. See itself sending more men and women into war, into the Middle East and Central Asia, or will there be peace in Afghanistan? Will the boys finally come home, the men and women come home from Afghanistan, or from the number of American military bases that still exist in Syria? We just saw a report from the Trump administration that U.S. troops have completed their withdrawal from Somalia. Your average American probably didn't even know that American troops were deployed in Somalia. Since 1991, since the Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu. So I think we can expect certainly wide sweeping domestic policy executive orders by the Biden administration, and we've already seen the campaign team hinting towards that as part of the economic recovery effort. Now, your average American right now cares more about domestic policy. So many people are out of work. The economy is shattered because of COVID, because of the pandemic, and because of the shutdowns that have forced so many businesses, small businesses, to close down. So many people being furloughed and losing their income, not having that safety net. So we've got to look at what the Biden administration will do for those tens of millions of people that are hurting in their pocketbooks today, not just on the foreign policy.
So, Oubai, US-Turkey tensions have raised a question about the future of bilateral relation, especially in the terms of Biden, because we see the YPG, problem between the two countries, the description of YPG and F-35 fighter jet and S-400s. How will you evaluate the future of bilateral relations?
Well, one, the senior advisor to President Biden on the Middle East is the most hated man in Turkey, Brent McGurk, who literally wrote a 2,000 word foreign affairs piece that, in my view, unfairly colored Turkey's position in the region, and essentially made the argument that Turkey, rather than being a natural partner for the U.S. to achieve mutual security interests in the region, was more of an adversary. So that's going to have an impact. Like I said, people equals policy. On issues like the F-35, there's frankly little that the Biden administration can do because of Congress is so heavily involved when it comes to CATSA and when it comes to sanctions related to the Turkish government's purchase of the S-400 system from Russia. But could we see Brett McGurk coming in with an olive branch to Turkey? That's very much possible. Can the U.S. See more eye to eye when it comes to Syria with Ankara? That's entirely possible, but that would mean that in between the time that Brett McGurk wrote that foreign affairs piece, which was just a couple of months ago, would have made a whole 180-degree ideological shift from now. So I think it's going to be rough waters ahead for the U.S.-Turkish bilateral relationship in this incoming Biden administration.
60 seconds, Oubai. I want to ask you one last question. Trump made a very interesting policy choice today on his last day in office, with Secretary Pompeo announcing their basically condemnation of China's role in oppressing the Uyghur population in the Xinjiang province. Why do you think Pompeo made that announcement today on the last day? And do you think that this is something that is going to actually be taken seriously by the Biden administration and pursued further?
I think this is where the Biden administration and the Trump administration see eye to eye. This is the first time that the U.S. government has made an official policy determination using genocide as the word for describing what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. That's a big deal. The last time the U.S. made a genocide determination was in Darfur. The big question here is whether or not the U.S. can get some of its other allies or partners in the Muslim world to make a similar determination. Why did it take so long? Well, State Department officials said officially that they needed more time to make, because it's such a serious foreign policy move, they need to get all the evidence. And now is the best time to make such a determination. This is a big deal. Now, Biden has said that his administration campaign said that what's happening there in Xinjiang is also a genocide, but now the pressure will be on the Biden administration on what they will do about it and how they will hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for the mass extermination and detention of Muslims in Xinjiang.
We'll see all of you guys at the inauguration. Thank you so much, Oubai. Thanks everyone. Thanks to the viewers. Subscribe, share, and like our channel, Turkey in English.
Bizimle kalın.
Bizimle kalın.